Welcome to C2GTalk, a series of one-on-one interviews with influential practitioners and thought leaders to explore the governance challenges raised by emerging approaches to alter the climate. I'm Mark Turner, C2G's Director of Communications. And with us today, we have Marie-Claire Graf, who is one of the global focal points of YOUNGO, the Children and Youth Constituency to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. She's Swiss youth advocate for sustainable development and climate action, and the president of the Swiss Associations of Student Organizations for Sustainability, as well as vice president at Swiss Youth for Climate. Marie-Claire is also a climate reality leader and co-founder of a crowdsourcing platform startup for aggregated science-based and citizen science data called C2GTalk. Welcome to the show, Marie-Claire Graf.
Hello, welcome from my side. I'm very glad to be here.
So you're a focal point for the youth constituency to the UNFCCC. How do you see the current moment in the world's efforts to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, I think that young people, but also country, are getting more and more desperate because basically 5 years ago, we set the Paris Agreement and everyone was pretty excited, right, to limit global warming to 2, aiming for 1.5, while young people have always been saying we need to go to 1.5. But despite these global agreements we are having, and despite the increasing action, despite also the climate strikes and young people rallying around the world, the emissions are still going up, right? I mean, we just recently had the report and we see the curve is still kind of skyrocketing, and we haven't yet flattened the curve, right? We are not yet going to net zero. And I think this is a really hard reality we are facing, and which comes also with some, mental health issues, frustration, especially amongst young people. But I mean, I do see there is a momentum going on, right? Countries are gathering, countries are still doing something despite the virus. But reality is not looking too well.
So 2019 was a pretty big year, I think, for the youth climate action. You saw a lot of efforts really hitting the headlines, coming to prominence at that time. There was the special meeting at the UN. And then there was a thought, I guess, that some of this would continue this year. And then, of course, there was COVID-19 and all associated with that. Do you see that the energy from the youth climate movement has been able to be maintained during this period, perhaps in different places? Tell me a little bit about this year for you.
Yeah, so I mean, we have been elected, Hita Lakhani from India, myself, at the last conference of the party, which was already a little bit special because, as you probably know, it would have happened in Chile. And then only 1 month prior to the meeting, which is the largest global UN gathering with around 25,000 people. And of course, the relevance of the issue is also attracting a lot of people and actors. It was moved continent, it was moved to Madrid within 1 month. So it was already a little bit not like how it's normally. It was a little bit like business, not as usual. And so we have been meeting in Madrid, we have been elected. And then we thought, okay, now this year of action, because the slogan was, it's time to act, right? It's coming, it's really sparking. And I mean, the NDC process, the National Determined Contributions. So we really had in mind that this year is going to be that big year for climate action. And we are finally going to bend the curve and aiming for net zero, and also with the COP26 presidency, who was very strong in this with the race to zero and so on. But everything came, of course, different. Our year started only some weeks into normal, and then it already got into quite chaotic. Everything was postponed. It was very hard for young people to make their voice heard in the UNFCCC processes. It was also very hard for young climate strikers on the streets because, of course, we take science serious. Science told us stay at home, stay socially and especially physically distanced, and that's what we have been doing. So it got challenging on the one hand side that the youth voice is heard, because a lot of things are now getting done very top-down, hierarchic, behind the doors. There is no way of young people can engage. Also, the UN itself is trying to get things done, right? I mean, with the climate dialogues, trying to have new engagement possibilities. And this, of course, is also very challenging for many young people to quickly enough adapt. And also, of course, a lot of people have like personal issues and struggles. Nevertheless, young people are here. Our demands and our requests are like the same as before. They're even more urgent now. So despite we maybe not making the headlines and we might not be like omnipresent as we have been before, we are here. We are not going away, and we will persist until the demands are implemented. So this is a little bit like this paradoxical situation. On the one hand side, we are not too visible, but we are still there and we are still watching.
This has been a lot of people's year of video conferencing, I guess. Are there avenues that you've been able to still use to speak to people in positions of power and influence via online media, and rather than the sort of traditional stuff on the streets that you were talking about?
I mean, we as YOUNGO, we of course talk like very extensively, actually, with like the UNFCCC, with UNFCCC, with UNDP, UNEP, and many other UN entities, UNICEF, and also the COP26 presidency, with different other streams when it comes to adaptation, mitigation, climate finance. Indigenous peoples, they have just right now a meeting, Action for Climate Empowerment. I mean, there are a lot of engagements we can use, and they're getting on one hand side also more accessible, because very often this meeting have been happening in Europe, which of course is very challenging for most of the young people around the world to participate, visa, finances, languages, and so on. So we have now the outstanding opportunity to also open it and broaden it, so more young people can engage in the different processes. And we do have this, and everyone is working hard to maintain this structure. Nevertheless, especially for young people who are not officially in a decision-making position, for us, basically the coffee breaks and the time, like before the delegates go into the room and negotiate, is most important, because this is where we can kind of have our influence. And this, of course, is not possible in an online world.
I think we all share that kind of experience one way or another, but I can imagine more challenging for some groups. So I wanted to talk a little bit about carbon dioxide removal. One of the issues that interests us this year has seen a lot of focus on net zero, as well as obviously the 1.5 degree target. How aware do you think youth climate activists are of the findings of the IPCC in its 1.5, in a special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees C, including on the need for large-scale carbon dioxide removal, as well as urgent emissions reductions?
So most young climate activists actually base our demands on the 1.5 report, which is side mark, still not officially like welcomed at the UNFCCC, because some countries are still blocking it. There is actually a movement where YOUNGO is also very involved, together with March for Science, the independent state of Samoa, and the Oasis Alliance. So many people are pushing that this report, and especially the findings, are officially welcome and recognized. That then also, for example, the NDCs, the national determined contributions, can be built based on this science, and that we can move on with this science. So this is one of our demands already since several years, since 2018, and we didn't yet succeed. We're also working hard to build up momentum amongst member states that this report is going to be officially welcomed at COP26. In general, many young people come with their own story into the climate space. So maybe someone comes from a gender lens, someone from agriculture, someone comes because their home was flooded. So young people come with, I think, very, very specific interest into the space. And then YOUNGO provides them an opportunity to grow and learn new things. This was also for myself. I came from the educational side, and I had the pleasure within YOUNGO to learn about different new findings and also interesting other points. So I think very little young people come into the climate space because of carbon dioxide removal or of any other technological advancements. I assume this is not like proven, but I think this people are not coming because of this into it, but they are learning within YOUNGO and many other spaces about different findings and about different technologies. We do have a technology working group, so they are definitely young people focusing on this, but I have the impression that it's more about renewable energies, because this is also where a lot of small projects are going on in different countries where young people do engage, whereas I am not aware that any young person maybe like put something like this in place, and this was the reason why this person was triggered. Nevertheless, young people are aware of it. As mentioned, I mean, the 1.5 special report is kind of our guiding document when it comes to science, and we would absolutely welcome if this is also welcomed by the parties and can be our official guiding document.
It's interesting you use the frame of these technologies. Carbon dioxide removal, at least the way we talk about it, can include nature-based approaches as well as technology-based approaches. Do you think that there's a difference in the way you and the people you speak with think about nature and technology? How do you see the sort of different framings there? Is there a sense of nature is something that people are more positive towards, technology is a little more scary? I'm just trying to get a sense of the relationship between nature and technology in your discussions.
Well, I mean, they are the techies, right? So the young people who are very excited about technology, and they are the more maybe like nature lovers who might be like more on the other side. I think it really strongly also depends where they are coming from and what their local experience was. So I think in Switzerland we have like maybe a good mix between like nature-based solution, like forests. We talk a lot. We try to maintain the forest and also like soils and humus, the black soil. Whereas in other parts of the world, you might not have this opportunity, and then you maybe like have you have large solar farms or whatever. So you get more exposed to this. So I think it really depends on what your story is and why you are engaged. But we do actually see like quite some engagement in like nature-based solutions, nature reforestation, but also agriculture, which of course is a significant part, the health of ocean, which is also like a huge natural sink, carbon sink. So we have a lot of young people being involved there, and we have a lot of young people being involved in technology transfer, especially also the governance aspect of it, because the UNFCCC is doing a lot of governance. So we do have both pages, and we do have also young people who kind of like on both spaces, right? So we can bridge it.
Right. But so specifically when I say the word carbon dioxide removal, though, do you think there's a natural assumption that this is a technological which is slightly different from nature-based, or do you think people understand it as the broader idea that, we have to stop putting CO2 in the air and start pulling it out of the air as well?
I think that there is a general awareness around it. Maybe like if you go into the details, as for every topic, I mean, you can also like the climate finance. If you go into the details, I'm personally also lost. International carbon tradings, I know what it is about, but if you go into the details, I'm not an expert, right? So I think in general, people have an awareness. But then if it goes into the nitty-gritty different solutions, I think most people are aware like about the trees, about the oceans, about the soil. But if you then go into the details, technological details, especially of different instruments, it might be quite challenging to follow. Also because, I mean, first, it's not a topic which is heavily discussed. And on the other side, it's also sometimes hard to find appropriate information. And it's not like in the social media news as present as other topics. So I think you're just generally like less exposed to the content, which makes it you're less aware.
So beyond large-scale carbon dioxide removal, our initiative is also interested in another set of additional potential approaches to tackle the climate crisis and manage risk, known as solar radiation modifications, sort of a family of approaches essentially to reflect back sunlight, including, for example, ideas around marine cloud brightening or stratospheric aerosol injection. Do you see any awareness in the communities you speak to of these ideas?
Again, I do think there is awareness, and I know that they are interested people. I know that they are people with quite some in-depth knowledge. But again, then like, is it a niche topic some experts might talk about, or is it a broad scale topic as, for example, I mean, I wouldn't say that, for example, gender is yet as mainstream as it should be, same for agriculture issues, but I think they already have a little bit of a broader engagement, and different people from different backgrounds and interests are coming into it, right? So I think this is not yet there for many of these different technological solutions, but they are for sure. I know there are young people who are experts in this and who are knowledgeable about this.
So how do you think people might learn more about these ideas? Do you think there's an openness to learning more about these ideas? And if so, what would be the sort of thing that should be done to help people understand? And also then maybe think about the nature of weighing up risk against risk, which is something we often think about here in our initiative. How do you consider the risk of doing something against the risk of not doing something, the risk of getting involved with some of these SRM approaches, or against, in the context of a risk of a warming world? How do you learn more, or what are the sort of things that can help young people grapple with these questions a bit better?
So in general, about the awareness, so how is normally happening? I mean, there is always a group of experts and interested people who are kind of talk about the issue, who are engaged, and then they are kind of also streaming this then into other areas. I think what is always very important, what we also encourage young people in YOUNGO, is to bring topics together. I mean, we have on all the topics, we have a climate lens, but for example, how can we bring topics around gender and adaptation, finance and agriculture, education and mitigation together, so that we are not looking, as like already in the UN, everything from a siloed approach, but we are actually bringing the topics together. And I think this is also very important when we are talking about solar radiation modification or carbon dioxide removal, that we have an approach, okay, where is this leading to? It's not a standalone issue, but it's right. A part, or like as you're mentioning, you're mentioning it's a solution of something bigger and of the risk. So I think we have to look at it from different perspectives and what would be the implications. In regards to the risk, I think young people are, or I see that a lot of young people are very, very afraid, or have mental health implications, are frustrated or depressed about the current state of the world, and also that there is more doom than gloom. So there is less and less to be hopeful about, especially if you're also seeing, I mean, like the Ambition Summit, which happened as the 5 years anniversary, and just the bold actions from some of the countries, whereas the biggest emitters haven't been at the table. And still, I mean, everyone can set some goals, as we have been seeing in Paris, but then you need to implement the actions that it's actually going to work. We can also see now with the coronavirus, which could have given us a huge opportunity to really shift the direction and go like completely turn around and make our decisions and our, especially also financial flows, economy, society, way more sustainability driven, and taking in consideration the natural boundaries, the climate boundaries. But we have unfortunately been seeing that many of the finances are still going into the direction of a very old fossil fuel driven economy, society. So we are not yet seeing this complete detach, and this of course is frustrating a lot of people. And I think where we can learn more about it is basically, okay, there is like the risk, there is where we are going to, and we're not yet having a solution. So we might have to take into consideration new ideas. And I think there, especially also because many people in YOUNGO work rather on the governance side, on the political advocacy side, that we talk about the governance, because there is, as far as I'm aware, no governance structure. So I think this is very important that we incorporate these governance questions as well, not only the techie part of the solutions, but also the more policy advocacy part.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the governance aspects of this, obviously something that interests us very much. So what role do you think young people might be able to play in basically pushing the governance of these approaches? And by governance, we take in C2G a fairly broad view of it, essentially including the whole process of learning and discussing and trying to sort of come to positions. What are the practical things that young people might do to start sort of shaping and thinking about these governance processes, given that there seems to be quite a lot of activity now, especially on carbon dioxide removal, but also the discussion around SRM is beginning to progress?
So I mean, in general, as you are aware, young people are not sitting at a table when decisions are taken. I mean, through YOUNGO, which is the official constituency, as mentioned, we have a certain engagement, but still, we are not the decision makers. We can influence them because we have access to spaces, because we are invited to certain meetings and conferences, but we are not the ones who are taking the ultimate decision. Nevertheless, we have, of course, seen that young people have a huge influence when it comes to steering the direction, and with the strike, with the awareness, but also with policy papers and advocacy, we are influential stakeholders, but we are not the one who are going to execute the decision at the end, which I think is very important. Of course, we as young people, we push forward that we are also at the table and take the decisions. But this will unfortunately probably go still some more years, because the current decision makers are hogging the spaces, unfortunately, and not letting especially young people with new innovative ideas. And this goes far beyond like what we are talking here, but just with also new social concepts, new economic concepts in. And also, I mean, of course, it's not exclusively young people who are driving this agenda, but I'm like representing here the young people. Of course, like it is much broader. Many people have been fighting for their whole life in this regard to open up certain corsets and certain very dominant structures. But I mean, it would be for many topics, including them, would be great to have young experts in the room who are able to be like agenda setters. What we as young people do is, like as mentioned, have like the capacity building, learning about it, awareness, that we are also able, when we catch our negotiators, when we catch our decision makers to talk about it, we do write advocacy and policy papers, basically what is our agenda to push forward at the COP or at another other meeting. But I think in general, it's very important to understand the space well enough that you know where you fit in, because the space is fairly complex, especially for young people who have been in the space only for a short amount of time, just because we are young, and to understand the space well enough to see where it's fitting in. And I think there the challenge comes that there is at the moment not per se a place where these discussions fit in. So maybe it's like getting here and here and here, a little bit talked at the sidelines, at the margins, but this is not a way how young people then can come in, because it's very easy to like, come on, this topic is not for this table. Like we are like very busy, we don't have the finances, we don't have time, just go somewhere else, right? So unless the topic is an agenda point, which is having a dedicated group which is tackling and talking about it, I think it's very hard to for young people to meaningfully contribute, just because it's very easy to put us off if there is not a dedicated stream or avenue of engagement, as we, for example, see with adaptation, mitigation, gender, education, and so on.
So to help me understand, what does that look like when you describe these particular streams? What does the influencing process look like? To what extent are you seeing young people's sort of voices not just being heard, but being listened to and acted upon? And so what in practice might that look like for some of these other areas? In a very sort of practical sense, what is it? Is it you sitting in certain meeting rooms, having certain sort of voting rights, or what practically might it look like?
So maybe just first, like we never have a voting right, because in the UN, it's a governmental-driven process. Young people are always excluded unless they're part of a delegation, which means that they get an official negotiation mandate, which is very rare. I myself have been a negotiator for Switzerland, and I will probably be in the future again for different topics as climate education, training, awareness, gender-related issues, technology transfer-related issues, as well as capacity building. But this is a very special case, and unfortunately, not many young people have the opportunity to be engaged in this manner. So what we are doing, we have a seat at the table or in the second row, wherever, but we can go into the room through YOUNGO, and we are also invited and can make our mind around, can make interventions, basically spoken mostly like 2-3 minutes intervention where we're speaking about the issue, and then we of course can also bring in new concepts or new ideas. But again, I mean, like many people do interventions, that our intervention then is taken serious is like the next step, and this again depends on the rather older guys sitting in the front rows. We can also do submissions, which is like a written statement from young people. There we are following the official requests from the UNFCCC. So basically they are asking, can you do a submission in regards to gender action, to gender finance or agriculture? And it's very often very, very specific. So it's not per se allowing us to bring in completely new concepts. I mean, one can try, but again, like someone is consolidating documents, and then it's also easy to just get like rid of some ideas. We have been like, it also really depends on personal relationships. Sometimes it works with someone from like the secretariat or the work stream very well, and they are inclined to listen to us. And sometimes they are just not interested in listening to young people, and then it's very easy to also put us off. So we have very good personal relations with some people, where they're listening to us. We can send in our points, for example, in climate education, action for climate empowerment in a broader scope. We have been writing text, which is now in the Katowice work program, so basically the guidelines on how to implement the Paris Agreement. We have been working also extensively, for example, on agriculture, where we could bring in some of our language when we're doing like interventions and so on. So there are work streams where we have been very engaged. And there are work streams which our voice is not yet as much heard as I would wish we are.
So could you give an example, maybe one of those you already mentioned or another, but where you think the process worked as it should in terms of listening to and acting upon what young people are saying? What would be the sort of an example where this happened in a way that should be applied more broadly?
So, I mean, in general, we try to do as many submissions as possible to raise our voice and to be included. But I think like this is, again, like there are many stakeholders. What we have been very extensively involved is for the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda, where we have been holding a youth forum, which was organized and co-convened by the UNFCCC, but organized by YOUNGO as well, where we had 100 young people working very, very specifically on how the ACE agenda, the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda, is moving forward. We have been writing an outcome document, which was also referred in the Katowice guidelines and work program. So basically, the countries seeing this, again, they can decide not to do it, but it's at least like there where like the major guidelines are. And I think this was a very meaningful engagement. Nevertheless, just because having a policy document, it never means that actually something is getting done. There are a lot of policy documents, there are a lot of text. And I think what is again then important to break it down also to national circumstance. We can do this through the NDCs. We have been seeing, fortunately this year, quite some very positive NDC processes where young people have been extensively taken into consideration. And I think this is the place where ultimately the action are getting implemented, because the international level, it's great to have a policy document and it's great to have some text somewhere. But if the countries and the parties are not doing it, then you also can't, the paper is not needed, right? So we have like a saying here, I don't know how to say this in English, but basically the paper itself is not getting boring. It can just stay there forever. And I think this is what also we as young people have to take in mind, that the ultimate actions are happening locally and nationally, and very little internationally. We need good and robust and clear frameworks, but we have to break it down. And the break it down can be very hard because all the countries have different approaches and different settings.
So how do you see the coming year? You had mentioned that 2020 was meant to be the year of action, getting things done. Do you think that could now be 2021? What are your hopes for 2021?
Well, I think 2020 and 2021 cannot be compared because just the overarching situation is difficult. I do believe that we will live with coronavirus for the next coming years, especially also with the economic and social challenges following with like the economic recession, but also with a lot of people still being on a health, physical, but also mental health affected by it. So we cannot neglect this. And even if there is a vaccine, there are effects which are going to stay way longer. We have been seeing what I think is great, because it's basically approving what we have been saying. If we treat a crisis as a crisis, we can tackle it. And this is basically probably the only thing which is giving me hope in this pandemic, that from the day we called the coronavirus a pandemic, so many things have suddenly been possible on a political level, but also among people. People have been showing solidarity as I've never seen before, between generations, between different levels of society, between different groups of people, which normally in a business as usual world would not be possible. But also, of course, just the bare financial side, where money flows were unleashed, which I have never seen before in my whole life. I was like, wow, where is all this money coming from? And when we're asking for a tiny, raising awareness campaign around climate, it's like, oh, well, we don't have the money. I'm sorry. So this is the only thing which giving me hope, that when we're treating a crisis as a crisis, the unimaginable things are possible. And this is what we as young people are going to call for next year. And this is what is still going to be there. But the world is going to look different. I think we will still battle with like heavily affected coronavirus areas around the world. And like until mid next year, like summer, it will be very challenging to be prepared as well for the international negotiations, just because the countries have to dealing with certain cases. Maybe like in some areas of the world it's going better, but there will always be areas where it's very severe and it's very hard to prepare adequately. And also, I mean, there is the coronavirus, but there are other not pandemics, but there are other epidemics going on in different parts of the world. There are other challenges. There are like huge inequalities around the world. So many of them actually the gap got even wider, and bringing back this is getting harder, especially for young people on the front lines of hunger, poverty, abuse, and so on, putting out of education. I mean, this cannot just be restored. It needs like a long way, but the climate is here and we have to treat it as a crisis. And this is what young people are going to call for at the moment, but also next year.
Actually, it's interesting. Well, there's two things I just wanted to maybe finish on in what you said there. First, actually, you used the word restored. There has been this framing around there of restoring the planet and then maybe repairing and another phrase. But how do you see that? Do you see it as a meaningful and useful approach to thinking about the crisis?
Well, I mean, where we are using the word is like, for example, ecosystems reforestation, and basically where we are trying to have like degraded ecosystems and have them reviving again and so on. So I think we are working on this, but we also have to see that it's taking time. I mean, the ecosystem is like a decade of ecosystem reforestation, and this is like a decade, right? It's on purpose, not like a month, a year, but it's a decade, because it's using like 10, 20, 50, 100 years. And I think this is also the challenge when it comes to the coronavirus. Even if we have a vaccine for the coronavirus, there's none for the climate crisis. But even if you have a vaccine, many things, especially on the economic and social side, are going to last for very, very long. And even if we put a lot of money into the system now, it's not going to change and it's not going to solve the fundamental issues we are facing, which are always coming from a certain inequality. And we see that most of the money is actually going into the old-fashioned system and is not allowing people and economy to change and transform in a way we would need it to transform to tackle the crisis.
The reason I grabbed on the word restore is that you mentioned ecosystem and so forth, but some people may also be using that term to restore with relationship to some of the proposed climate altering approaches or technologies that are on the table, which of course then raises a lot of questions as to, well, can you restore? But if you were to be able to, what would you restore to? And who decides where you would restore to? And what would be the place where you want to go there? And so I'm just interested whether you see that this framing, which seems to be emerging a little bit, can be used in different ways by different actors, and what issues it might give rise to.
Yeah, I mean, we also see like from the World Economic Forum, they're using the word reset, and then we have like the word restore. I mean, the climate crisis is based on inequalities, which is based on our economic and social system, which again is, in my point of view, and also like backed up heavily by science, is not be able to tackle the crisis and lead us to a more sustainable, livable future as we are, as young people and many other people are dreaming of, and we are wishing to be there, right? I mean, we had at COP23, we had the Talanoa dialogues around the question, where are we at the moment? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And I think the world most people imagined and were painting and talking about where we want to go is very different than what we have today. So when we are saying like restore or reset, and we mean by going to the world we had in 2020, it's mostly not what most people want. I think it's rather like a weird, maybe a little bit weird that we are talking about this restoring or resetting, but actually means something we have probably never lived in. At least like I myself have never lived in a world I wish to live in a broader context. The world I'm dreaming of, I have never seen. in real life. So, but it's easy probably for people to say like, oh, we are resetting, we are restoring something, instead of imagining. But I think that at the fundamental heart and the belief and the desire of many of these people, it's this better world we try to achieve in the future.
Maybe just to finish on this concept of hope, dreams, doom, despair. It's one of these very difficult issues that a lot of people personally struggle with, especially in this field, how to get that balance right, how to maintain a sense of hope without that hope becoming hopium, i.e. false hope, or a fake hope, a sense of direction and being able to do something whilst also recognizing the gravity of the moment and not undermining the gravity of the moment. How do you personally balance those two requirements essentially to operate in this field, recognizing the gravity of the situation whilst not abandoning a sense that you can do something about it?
Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm engaged in YOUNGO, right? That's one of the reasons why I'm still sticking around the space, despite it's complex, despite I can have probably a more relaxed life without it. I mean, this year was a little bit chaotic, but normally, I mean, like who has been at the COP knows that how stressful such a COP can be, and also the preparation and the debriefing afterwards. But it's about the people who are in the space and the people who are, regardless of all of these challenges, are keep moving. And I think this is what gives me hope, especially young people, but also I'm very interested to learn from all different generations, because these people have been very often like around for much longer, of course, and have like a different perspectives I just simply can't have. So I gained my hope from the people who are involved, from the people who are engaged with the UNFCCC processes, from people outside, from people on the streets, and yeah, that there is so much power and so much willingness to change this world. And I do think that there will be a social tipping point we are going to reach. And I do think it's coming very, very soon. And I think that what we have to do is now preparing for this time when we reach finally this social tipping point of where we have these irreversible changes, but in the social and in the economic sphere, not in the what we are now referring to very often in the rather like natural science, climate system sphere. And my hope is that we are reaching a social tipping point way before we are reaching even more of the climate-related tipping points.
Marie-Claire Graf, thank you very much indeed for joining us on C2GTalk. Really appreciated speaking to you.
Thank you so much.